ground.
If we're talking about roughly 50 aircraft gone, if we assume that, it still leaves roughly 750 left. Do you have any indication the Iraqis are doing a move-and-hide strategy? Perhaps to some of these dispersal fields that there was damage done, but they still have support facilities there to operate air power. Is that concerning you, especially since if they rebuild, they could put up a mass wave of 200, 300, 400 aircraft all of a sudden?
I attribute that capability to them. In addition to the facilities you saw on that map, they're probably using highways and other things like that. And so we assume that they have that capability. They did not use it in the first 7 days of the war. They did not challenge us with defensive air. They have not tried to attack us with offensive air. But that does not mean we are not on the lookout for it, or we're not alert to it, or we are unmindful of the threat it represents. It does represent a threat, but it's a threat we understand, we believe we are quite able to deal with, and rather than spend air power now trying to run the body count up on airplanes that are not bothering us at the moment, I'd rather use that air power in more efficient ways against things that are more immediate relevance to our battle plan.
General, there have been reports that at least one other country in the area is providing a sanctuary for Iraqi aircraft or other equipment. Do you have any evidence at all to support or
I've seen those reports and I can't confirm them. Mike, do you?
No, sir, not confirmed.
Michael?
And General Powell, I'd like to ask you to expand a little bit on what you infer the Iraqi military strategy to be. You said what their actions could be part of a strategy. Does the Iraqi military response to date, that is, the absence of a response, surprise you? Were you surprised by that? Do you think it's an attempt to engage us in a costly land war? And a related question, General Powell said that implied that we hope not to have to use ground forces. At the same time, he said the Republican Guards will lie low, and that the only way we may determine if they survived attack is if they're forced to move. Does that mean we'll have to bring in our ground forces in order to determine whether we've knocked them out?
Don't know yet. The strategy right now, it seems to me, is they are hunkering down. I mean, it's obvious. I suspect, and not being an Iraqi general, I don't have complete insight into what they may be thinking, but I would suspect that right now they are hunkering down, and they probably are questioning whether we can keep this up for an extended period of time, and whether or not the political will and public support will be there to keep this up for an extended period of time. And I'm sure they're making an assessment day by day on what their losses are and making their own judgment as to how long they can sustain this kind of punishment. I would be the happiest guy in the world if one day one bomb goes in on a Republican Guard unit and they say, that's it, we break, can't take anymore, we're heading home, and they leave. But I can't plan on that. And so what I'm putting in place, and what General Schwarzkopf is putting in place, I should say, and the campaign plan that General Schwarzkopf has worked out, is to anticipate that at the end of the day, when they are so weakened that we believe the time is right and air power alone won't do it, we're prepared to take this to a successful conclusion using other means of combat power besides air power.
Sir,
that's been a consistent...
Is this the response that you anticipated in planning your campaign by the Iraqi military strategy?
At this, I'd rather not say what I anticipated because it might give Mr. Hussein some insight into what I'm anticipating now.
General.
Young lady,
Mr. Secretary, can you tell us, you said a minute ago that Saddam Hussein cannot change the basic course of this conflict. He will be defeated. Can you tell us, is there any reason to believe that he and his circle of advisors believes that? And what are you doing to make him believe that? And if you're not doing anything, why not?
Well, I think if it was difficult before the conflict started to try to assess Saddam Hussein's mental attitude and his thinking about all of these kinds of issues, it's probably even more difficult now. No press left in Baghdad, very little diplomatic communication through other countries. We know less today about what's going on inside Saddam Hussein's mind than we did then, so it'd be risky business for us, I think, to make judgments about that. It may well be that he does not have as much information as we do about the impact we've had on his forces, that having in many cases damaged his command and control system and had the impact that Colin shows with respect to his air capability, etc., that he simply doesn't know how badly he's been hit. And I think ultimately he'll get the message. I would hope that he will. And we are determined, in terms of the statement I made, to achieve our military objective, which is to do what the President's directed us to do, which is to get Saddam Hussein out of Kuwait.
Is it part of the plan that he should not know, in that, would you like to visit a minimum level of destruction, for instance, upon the Republican Guard before he knows it?
Well, it's difficult to refine it that carefully. I mean, once you start military action, you can go after those specific targets we've laid out there, but we believe the Republican Guard is at the heart of his military capability and his political power. That's the unit that he used to take Kuwait. Those are the units that he used in his war with Iran for offensive purposes. They are the heart of the regime. And we're not really trying to fine-tune it. We'll hit the Republican Guard just as hard as we have to until we've achieved our objective.
Mr. Secretary, we know that he has in the past several days demonstrated a capability to put salvos of Scuds over major cities from Tel Aviv across the area to the Persian Gulf. If he marries them now with chemical weapons, poison gas or other, are we prepared, and would we respond in kind?
We have to be concerned about the possibility that he may have chemical capability that he could marry up with his ballistic missiles. He's never previously used ballistic missiles with chemical warheads on them, but we have to assume he could. It's one of the reasons for the elaborate alarm systems we've worked out, both in Saudi Arabia and that the Israelis have worked out, the protective gear that our troops are equipped with, etc. In terms of how we might respond were he to use chemical weapons, I would simply reiterate what we've said previously, which is that the United States has a broad spectrum of capabilities available, that the President would make the decision about how we might respond to an unconventional attack by Saddam Hussein against U.S. or allied forces, and I wouldn't want to speculate further.
Secretary, could I ask you a couple of questions? First of all, about the report of a coup attempt. Have you heard anything about this at all within Iraq?
Nothing that would give me any reason to believe it has great credence.
And Mr. General Powell, I have another question about the Exocets. We talked about the silk words being taken out, but you didn't say anything about the Exocets, and many people think that's one of the most effective weapon systems he has. It was very effective in the Falklands conflict. Have you done anything to take out the Exocets?
The Navy's working on it. They're of limited range and don't represent a very serious threat at the moment.
Secretary General. Mr. Secretary. Thank you. You were saying before that the coalition would take as long as it had to, and yet you've outlined some goals that look like they might last long. That you said that you want to rip up the Air Force, yet they still have some 750 planes, and you said you wanted to shut up the Army with cutting off its communications, which is still very resilient, a very large Army. The chemical weapon threat is still a threat to the Allied, and the Scud is still a weapon of terror for the Allies. Does that not sound like it's going to last some time?
Well, we've avoided consistently putting any sort of artificial deadline out there by which this whole operation had to be completed. We do not know how long it will last. Those are the kinds of things you mentioned, our specific objectives. We will operate until we've achieved those objectives, and I simply wouldn't want to put a time frame on it. I can't do that. I don't know how long it will take, although I'm inclined to think, given the size of the force we've deployed and the success we've enjoyed to date, that it won't take that long.
But is the Allied force patience going to outlast the patience of Saddam Hussein, who's hunkering down? Which patience is going to outlast?
There's no doubt in my mind, but what the United States and our allies in this venture have the staying power to see to it that the job gets done, that he will quit long before we will.
Secretary Cheney and actually General Powell, you're mentioning now that your main focus is the Republican Guards. Does that mean at this juncture in the air campaign you're pretty much sparing the troops right at the front line?
No, they are under attack as well. We're selectively probing against all of the forces in the Kuwaiti theater of operations. But because the Republican Guard is the Republican Guard, they get more attention than the rest.
What about the
Secretary Cheney, on the Scud threat, what percentage of the Scud launchers would you say have mobile and fixed have been destroyed, and how well are the Allies on the way towards destroying the full Scud capability so that the Saudis and the Israelis won't have to worry about that?
I don't think you can put a hard percentage on the amount of his capability that's been destroyed. We know he had a large number of missiles before this started. The missiles are important, but the launchers are even more important. We know we've been able to attack successfully many of the fixed sites. We continue to work on those fixed sites. We know he's got mobile capability, but we have some confidence we've destroyed some of that mobile capability. But it's a nebulous kind of thing. They're relatively small pieces of equipment. They can hide in the desert. They can come out at night and launch. It doesn't require any great degree of sophistication for them to be able to operate. And it's one of those problems that may be with us for some period of time, and that it's a matter of reducing the odds as much as possible, going aggressively after his launch capability, but also defending the targets, which is why we've deployed Patriot both in Saudi Arabia and Israel.
Who fired the Patriot that apparently hit or didn't hit the Scud that did the damage in Tel Aviv yesterday?
IDF.
Why did they do it instead of the U.S. crews?
Well, either one could have done it, whoever was in position. The U.S. crew was working with a power problem, a generator problem they had at the time, and IDF got acquisition and fired.
Did that Patriot hit the Scud?
I really would prefer to defer to the IDF to comment on their actions. I'm just passing on a report I heard.
Secretary, just going back to an earlier line of questioning, what is your view of the argument that, in fact, if Saddam Hussein's strategy is simply to stretch this war out as long as possible, forcing the Allied troops into a long, bloody ground war, he's enjoying some success in that? How do you view that, and is there anything you can really do if he continues to husband his resources as he's been doing?
Well, I'm not a military strategist to the extent that my colleague General Powell might be, but looking at it from the perspective U.S. forces versus Iraqi forces, he really hasn't got much choice at this point. I mean, he is pursuing a strategy perhaps of necessity. If he comes up with his air forces in significant numbers, I think we'll see the kind of ratio that Colin talked about in terms of 19-0 or 19-1 on his entire Air Force, and he would lose it and gain very little for it. He doesn't have any significant naval capability. He's really left with a very large army. That's always been the heart of his military strength, and his success in the Iran-Iraq war was to dig in and hunker down and defend against the human wave assaults by Iranian teenagers. That's not the kind of situation he's faced with today, and I think the reason he will not be successful with a weighted-out strategy is that as long as he is sitting there waiting, we are steadily and progressively destroying his unconventional warfare capability, finding and destroying his Scuds, taking out his Air Force piece by piece, and now, as the chairman pointed out, aggressively working over his ground forces in Kuwait. I think time is clearly on our side, and that given our dominance in the air and our capability to do significant damage to his ground forces, that each day, each week that goes by, he gets weaker and we get stronger.
But you stated your goal, though, is to get his troops out of Kuwait, and in fact, while this pummeling continues, his troops remain still reasonably intact, which suggests that it's inevitable that he will draw the Allies into a ground war.
Well, we may eventually, and I'll defer to General Powell and General Schwarzkopf. They'll have to come back and advise me and the President on when various pieces of the campaign kick in. But if we do have to go to using our ground forces to push him out of Kuwait, it will be after we've done enormous damage to his ground forces, after they've been significantly weakened. And I think our people have the same capability on the ground to display the kind of mastery over Iraqi forces that they've displayed in the air today.
Thank you very much, sir. The aircraft that you're